Just about 27 years ago, Sonic the Hedgehog was released for the Sega Genesis, a platformer who for the time actually stood a chance at dethroning Mario and Nintendo's reign as a whole. So of course, with the blue blur being such a key figure in so many childhoods, thus came the genesis of an enormous fandom. A fandom that, unlike many popular ones today, has not only been around for a really long time, but is still thriving quite nicely. Though unfortunately, to say it's been a bumpy ride would be an understatement. To get to where we are now, the Sonic fandom has been through countless and merciless beatings, many of which coming from the very fandom itself. Hello everyone, this is the RPG Monger, and welcome to the Fandom Files, the bi-weekly series where I take you into the deepest trenches of each and every fandom. As a fan of Sonic games myself, it was kind of inevitable that I'd be here making this video. And as a fan, along with recounting everything the Sonic fandom has been through, I also want to discuss why so many people seem to hate and generalize the entire Sonic fandom as a whole. Now, before I go into the epic that is this fandom's history, I just want to say that anyone who considers Sonic's fandom as bad just because people draw porn of it is actually an idiot. Because guess what? Everything has porn drawn of it. Even my favorite fandom, Kirby, has boatloads of porn if you actually go looking for it. I mean, seriously, unless you explicitly go looking for it, odds are you won't even find it besides the off chance of it coming up at the bottom of a Google search. Like, come on, people even said Cuphead had a bad fandom because of this. Though that little rant of mine aside, let's get back to the main topic at hand. Unlike all of the fandoms I've covered so far, what really makes this case unique is the fact that the Sonic fandom has actually been around since before the internet became a staple in every household. That being said, the early years of the Sonic fandom were actually quite pleasant. Just about everyone in it loved the game, and that was that. Though due to Sonic's overwhelming success, then came all the comics, cartoons, and everything in between. And considering what might appeal to the children of Japan might not appeal to those in America, there were many continuities made at this time. Hell, one manga in Japan even had Sonic as the alter ego of a normal schoolboy. In the US alone, there were two continuities going at the exact same time, those being the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon and the Sonic SatAM cartoon with its respective comic, which while didn't exactly cause any discourse in the fandom at their creation, proved to cause some of the first tremors within the fandom later on. You see, specifically with Sonic SatAM, Sonic was given quite the detailed story, a story that in turn had a boatload of characters that fans latched onto. As a result, once the game started to develop their own stories completely separate from the show, and the comic for that matter, fans were left pretty annoyed that Sega had just thrown out the story and characters they'd come to know and love, especially with one certain chipmunk. But alas, fans moved on, and everything was fine once more. And while that was only a minor incident that didn't really have much of a lasting effect, what was about to come would really begin to test the loyalty of the fandom. Now, a couple of years have passed, and in came the industry's obsession with 3D graphics, which just about everyone proclaimed to be the future of gaming. At the time, everyone was really excited to see their favorite franchises make the jump to 3D, with Sonic being no exception. Though unfortunately, there was a problem. The Sega Saturn just wasn't exactly the most capable console for the job, with the one attempt at a full 3D Sonic game to rival Mario 64 being cancelled. Due to this, the Sonic fandom really was stagnant for a while. Fast forward 5 years later, and finally, after being stale ever since the Genesis games, the Sonic fandom exploded with the release of Sonic Adventure, a groundbreaking game for its time, originally released on Sega's newest console, the Dreamcast. At this point, the fandom was absolutely thriving, with Sonic's popularity going through the roof. And honestly, going forward with the release of Sonic Adventure 2, the fandom continued thriving quite quite well, until BAM! All of a sudden, the Dreamcast was no more, and Sega stopped making consoles altogether. Of course now, without a system they truly knew by heart, creating solid Sonic games would prove to be much more difficult. And it did, because with the release of Sonic Heroes, many problems prevalent in the past two games only became worse, especially considering Sega was more or less forced to push the game to the PS2, forcing them to change the game's engine halfway through development. Due to all of this, at this point, cracks began showing in the fandom's loyalty as fans not only questioned the oversized cast of characters, but many of the new design elements being implemented. Though even then, these things were still minor compared to what was about to come. While certain elements may have been disappointing, the game so far had all been playable, or at least enjoyable in their own rights. What would come next, however, was something entirely different, and ironically enough, it wasn't even a game that caused this fracture in the fandom, but a promotional image for one. That image being this one right here, everyone's favorite hedgehog touting a pistol as his weapon of choice. Now, ridiculousness aside, was Sega's desperate attempt to stay cool successful? As I'm sure you all know, not at all. Ultimately, it ended up with not only fans outright leaving the fandom out of frustration, but the birth of Sonic purists within the fandom. People who would criticize just about every game since the Genesis era for not being more like those first few games. Though after that mess, the majority of the fandom were still loyal enough to give Sonic a second chance. I mean, come on. It was already the next generation. How could the newest entry get lower than that? Well, then it happened. Like the Grim Reaper taking your soul, a game simply titled Sonic the Hedgehog came to take the souls of every Sonic fan who had remained loyal. With Sonic 06 being not only the worst Sonic game, but one of the worst games ever made, those purists I mentioned earlier only thrived and grew in number. Now, what was once a relatively peaceful fandom had begun to be quite harshly split on whether 3D Sonic games were even good to begin with, an attitude that was pretty opposite to what we had seen before. The funniest thing is, even though the Sonic Advance games had done exactly what these so-called purists had been demanding and constantly arguing about with a return to the more Genesis-esque style, they'd still keep proclaiming throughout the fandom that Sonic needed, quote-unquote, saving. Well, when faced with situations like these, the ever-growing legion of purists plaguing the fandom began to point fingers. And soon enough, among everything else, they had finally found a scapegoat, the children. Since with Sega stating the obvious fact that the majority of the series is geared towards children, as it always has, the obnoxious elitists had finally found a way to denounce Sega and anyone who enjoyed anything that wasn't on the Genesis. The most ironic thing is, while these older elitists wanted things to stay the same and childish like the old games, the new younger fans actually wanted Sonic to become more mature. And to make matters worse, by now, the vocal minority of elitists had become so loud that due to their constant whining, Sega began making Sonic 4, a game that would fit all of their requests. Not only would the game be in the classic 2D style, Sonic would also be the sole playable character. And even then, before the game was released, the Sonic elitists somehow found a way to continue their pattern of hatred, with such petty arguments as, the eye color should be black, not green. In the end, it seems like whatever Sega did, these people would never be pleased. But let's fast forward even more now. With many Sonic games, some good, some bad, coming and going, the modern Sonic fandom is honestly quite stable, with the vocal minority of elitists either being shunned by the fandom or leaving it altogether. I have seen countless examples of the community being a really wonderful place to be right now. However, with that being said, in the current day, why is it that so many people still consider Sonic's fandom to be one of, if not the worst out there? Well, besides the dumb argument that porn has ruined it, unfortunately, Sonic has amassed a massive hatedom. A hatedom that exists not only because of the elitists Sonic had, but for certain individuals that the hatedom has chosen to represent the entire Sonic fandom by. Let's just get the big one out of the way, since with talking about the Sonic fandom, I really can't avoid mentioning him. Christian Weston Chandler, or Chris Chan, is an autistic man who, while clearly doesn't represent the fandom as a whole, seems to be one of the main figures that the hatedom uses to represent the entire fandom. I would talk about him in detail, but to be honest, I could never, ever top the actual documentaries people have made about him on YouTube. I highly suggest you go take a look at them if you want an interesting watch. Now, while Chris Chan and people like this...
I'm not sure if you caved in to the little kiddies again, because all I'm seeing here is a rehashed Sonic Rush game ported to the consoles. The same ugly, stretched out, green-eyed Sonic fighting the modern-style Eggman. Is that what he's going to be called too? Dr. Eggman?
Are a big majority of what the hatedom uses to classify all Sonic fans, with the latter actually completely changing into a better person since then. There is one other half that I have to address: the supposedly awful community on DeviantArt. Something you can immediately see as false just by seeing all of the wonderful art produced by the fandom in the current day on the site. But of course, there is still that vocal minority. Take people like Akai Dahlia or Princess Elizabeth 13, who have become practically infamous for their Mary Sues and how desperately they'll defend them. I mean, seriously, just look at all the crap these people have done. Though while those two and people like them are pretty terrible, they don't even make up 1% of the entire fandom. So is Sonic's fandom really the worst out there? Not in the slightest. And to be frank, anyone who says it is are just overblowing stuff by a lot. In the end, I just want to say this: don't ever feel ashamed that you're a part of a fandom that has bad eggs. Every fandom has them to varying degrees, and as long as you're enjoying your time in the fandom, then that's really all there is to it. And to the hatedom that makes Sonic fans feel ashamed to be part of the fandom, seriously, try actually taking a look at the fandom instead of just listening to what your peers tell you. It may even change your mind on whether what you're doing is even significant in the slightest. Alright, there you have it. Hopefully now, this video somehow convinces the members of the hatedom to stop their needless harassment of the fandom. And remember, do keep sending me the best fandom stories you have through my Twitter DMs. I'm gathering a ton of them right now for an upcoming video I'm sure all of you will enjoy. And as always, leave your worst or best fandom stories from the Sonic fandom in the comments below, so I can in turn feature my favorites in the next episode of the Fandom Files. And since I never took one from the creepypasta episode, here is one I've been saving. I was friends with a girl back in middle school who was obsessed with creepypasta. I was excited to see another fan since creepypasta isn't really big where I live. The thing is, she believed she was actually dating Ben Drowned and that Slender Man was her own father, but I never thought too much of it since we rarely talked in middle school. The trouble actually started in freshman year when she nearly drafted me into helping her run away from home to live with Slender Man. She didn't actually go through with it, but it did leave me rattled. This entire mess really picked up sophomore year when she would, on random days, leave me a pile of her stuff to keep for the night. Like I said, I was a stupid kid at the time and thought nothing of it, but it turns out she was using me to hide that shit from her parents. This nightmare climaxed during junior year when she revealed that she would try and get Ben a body. I assumed that she would either dig up a body, kidnap someone, or actually try and kill someone. But luckily, and I mean luckily, she never followed up on it at all. And after yet another bizarre plan to run away, she moved away shortly afterwards. It's crazy to see how obsessed some people get over just a couple of spooky stories. Needless to say, you're definitely better off not being around her. Hopefully now she's come to her senses. Though anyways, it's that time of the video again. Do remember to vote in the iCard at the top right of the video for the next episode of the Fandom Files. I'll put some in there that I've been seeing a lot of people request. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it, do subscribe. And today's cool thing of the day is just the Kirby series in general. I mean, seriously, can you get a series that has had so many solid main series games back to back like Kirby has? I mean, honestly, if you've never dived dived into a Kirby game, then you're definitely missing out. The delightful gameplay combined with wonderful music really makes it what it is. Not to mention the games actually have serious lore behind them as well. If you haven't already, by all means get into it. So that being said, I'm the RPG Monger, and don't forget that each and every one of you are fantastic.